All right, good morning. I said at the end of first service that we would get started early this morning, and it's 9:29, and so that qualifies as early, so we will get started. Let's go ahead and begin with prayer. Lord, open now my heart to hear, and through your word to me draw near. Let me your word ere pure retain, let me your child and heir remain. Amen. Hopefully you got a lesson guide, and if you need a Bible, a hard copy, there are several that are available in multiple print sizes too. There's the small print and the large print, so either one. As was mentioned at the end of first service, today is kind of the conclusion. I guess you could say that we had a little to be continued after last week's Bible study. We looked at kind of the setup and the political maneuvering of Absalom's rebellion against his father David. He's attempting a coup, and it looks like he's having some pretty significant success thus far from what we have studied. But we're going to see how that plays out and how it's brought to a conclusion today as we look at 2 Samuel. We're actually going to take the very last verse of chapter 16, and then we're going to take chapters 17 and 18 and go into chapter 19 just a little bit. To get us started this morning, look at the primer. Think of a time in your life when you were reminded that God is in control. Take your pick, right? Something that was as vivid as possible. Very vivid reminder that God is in control. And if anybody would like to share them, we will take a couple examples. Sue! Mm-hmm. And I just had it done like 3 weeks before. Oh. So several things in the car accident that Sue had about a year ago that reminded her that the Lord was in control. The Lord spared her and the other person from any serious injury, even though her car was totaled. So, absolutely, that's a great example. Any others? Reminders that God's in control. Good, Professor. Yep. Which is exactly what we want. Absolutely. So yeah, the Lord gives us wonderful blessings through doctors and through the practice of medicine, but ultimately, the Lord is still in control. Our time of grace in this world is not determined by an exam or a test that we get at the doctor's office. Our time of grace ultimately is in the hands of the Lord. Chris. Yep. Great example, too, how the Lord is even working through this, not just despite this pandemic, but even through this pandemic to further work in his kingdom. Great examples. We are going to see as the rest of Absalom's rebellion plays out, we're going to see in some subtle ways and some not so subtle ways that the Lord remains in control, because at this point things are not looking the greatest for King David. But we're going to see that ultimately the Lord has this all in his hands. So be on the lookout for that as we go through this. We are in 2 Samuel chapter 16, verse 23. which is the very last verse of chapter 16. So essentially we're taking all of 17 here, but we're taking that verse on to the end of it. And this is one of those instances, the chapter and verse divisions of the Bible are not divinely inspired. This is one of those times when I just really wonder what the logic was of putting the chapter division where they did here, because verse 23 of chapter 16 serves as a much better introduction to chapter 17 than it does serve as a conclusion to chapter 16. So, but, anyway. Follow along with me there, beginning at 2 Samuel 16:23. Now in those days the advice Ahithophel gave, was like that of one who inquires of God. That was how both David and Absalom regarded all of Ahithophel's advice. So this guy is highly, highly respected. And remember, Ahithophel is on Absalom's side now. Ahithophel said to Absalom, I would choose 12,000 men and set out tonight in pursuit of David. I would attack him while he is weary and weak. I would strike him with terror, and then all the people with him will flee. I would strike down only the king and bring all the people back to you. The death of the man you seek will mean the return of all. All the people will be unharmed. This plan seemed good to Absalom and to all the elders of Israel. But Absalom said, summon also Hushai the Archite, so we can hear what he has to say as well. And when Hushai came to him, Absalom said, Ahithophel has given this advice. Should we do what he says? If not, give us your opinion. Hushai replied to Absalom, the advice Ahithophel has given is not good this time. You know your father and his men. They are fighters, and as fierce as a wild bear robbed of her cubs. Besides, your father is an experienced fighter. He will not spend the night with the troops. Even now, he is hidden in a cave or some other place. If he should attack your troops first, whoever hears about it will say, there's been a slaughter among the troops who follow Absalom. Then even the bravest soldier, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, will melt with fear. For all Israel knows that your father is a fighter, and that those who with him are brave. And so I advise you, let all Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, in other words, from north to south, as numerous as the sand on the seashore, be gathered to you, with yourself leading them into battle. Then we will attack him wherever he may be found, and we will fall on him as dew settles on the ground. Neither he nor any of his men will be left alive. If he withdraws into a city, then all Israel will bring ropes to that city, and we will drag it down to the valley until not so much as a pebble is left. Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the advice of Hushai the Archite is better than that of Ahithophel. For the Lord had determined to frustrate the good advice of Ahithophel in order to bring disaster on Absalom. Hushai told Zadok and Abiathar, the priests, Ahithophel has advised Absalom and the elders of Israel to do such and such, but I have advised them to do so and so. Now send a message at once and tell David, do not spend the night at the fords in the wilderness. That'd be really different geography. At the fords in the wilderness, cross over without fail, or the king and all the people with him will be swallowed up. Jonathan and Ahimaaz were staying at En-Rogel. A female servant was to go and inform them, and they were to go and tell King David, for they could not risk being seen entering the city. But a young man saw them and told Absalom. And so the two of them left at once and went to the house of a man in Bahurim. He had a well in his courtyard, and they climbed down into it. His wife took a covering and spread it over the opening of the well and scattered grain over it. No one knew anything about it. When Absalom's men came to the woman at the house, they asked, where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan? The woman answered them, they crossed over the brook. The men searched and found no one, so they returned to Jerusalem. After they had gone, the two climbed out of the well and went to inform King David. They said to him, set out and cross the river at once. Ahithophel has advised such and such against you. And so David and all the people with him set out and crossed the Jordan. By daybreak, no one was left who had not crossed the Jordan. When Ahithophel saw that his advice had not been followed, he saddled his donkey and set out for his house in his hometown. He put his house in order and then hanged himself. So he died and was buried in his father's tomb. David went to Mahanaim, and Absalom crossed the Jordan with all the men of Israel. Absalom had appointed Amasa over the army in place of Joab. Amasa was the son of Jether, an Ishmaelite, who had married Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, and sister of Zeruiah, the mother of Joab. The Israelites and Absalom camped in the land of Gilead. When David came to Mahanaim, Shobi, son of Nahash, from Rabbah of the Ammonites, and Machir, son of Ammiel, from Lo-debar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite, from Rogelim, brought bedding and bowls and articles of pottery. They also brought wheat and barley, flour and roasted grain, beans and lentils, honey and curds, sheep and cheese from cows, milk for David and his people to eat. For they said, the people have become exhausted and hungry and thirsty in the wilderness. So far, our reading. Want to pick out the highlights from 2 Samuel chapter 16, and I would hope that most of those highlights can be tackled in the 4 questions that you have in front of you. You are encouraged to work with the people around you on those 4 questions, and I'll give you some time to work through those, and then we'll come back together as a group. Just a quick survey. If you are through number 2, can you raise your hand for me? Okay, if you're through number 3, can you raise your hand? If you're through number 4, can you raise your hand? Okay, we seem to be stuck on 4. All right. Let's talk about these 4. Ahithophel gives his counsel to Absalom in 17, verses 1 through 3. Does his battle plan sound wise to you? Why or why not? Why wise or why not wise? What do you think? Chris?
I think it sounds perfect because he's been fleeing for a very long time. And assume like 3, 4 days or something like that. He's just fleeing. And so if you send your shock troops out and capture him and kill him, you not only just take one person's life and save all the other army that you can take for yourself. It's just like a sneak attack.
Okay, so there's a couple things at play here. So number 1, you probably stand the best chance of getting David when he's on the run, when his men are weary and tired. That could work to their advantage. Number 2, if you're able to defeat just David and spare as many as you possibly can, isn't that going to cause some goodwill to go in your favor? Among the people who were following David? Okay, well, Absalom, all he wanted was David, and he's sparing everybody else. Okay, well, he at least the guy has going that for him, or that going for him. Yeah, it seems to make a lot of sense, and plus, then the sooner you cut the proverbial head off the snake, the sooner you then take away all the people who were following David. They no longer have anybody else to follow. So, okay, well, I only have one option left. I guess Absalom is it. All right, my guy's gone. Okay. So this seems to be pretty good advice, and we can kind of see why 16:23 says what it says. That when Ahithophel gave advice, it was as if he was one who had consulted God or inquired of the Lord. Number 2, remember that Hushai is the double agent. So he is in Absalom's court, but he's really an informant and a saboteur on behalf of David. Explain the monumental task he had in giving it his advice for a battle plan to Absalom. He has to make it sound really good, number one. So his plan has to sound better than Ahithophel's plan, right? So it's as good as Ahithophel's plan sounds, and it sounds really good, Hushai's got to make his sound better. Megan. And while it sounds good, it can't be good. Can't be good for whom? Can't be. Yes, so this has to sound good on the surface, but really be detrimental to Absalom's cause. Oof. So Hushai's got his work cut out for him. Larry.
More importantly, you have to think that it not only has to, the advice has to benefit David, yet make it sound like it benefits Absalom. So you got to balance that out.
Yep. It has to benefit David in practice, but it has to sound like it's going to benefit Absalom. So this is just such a tightrope that Hushai has to walk here. Why did Absalom take Hushai's advice? So Absalom's got these two competing visions, these two competing plans from two of his advisors, and he picks Hushai's. Why?
Well, I think he makes Absalom the center of the attack.
Okay.
And he's preying on his ego.
Okay, Joyce makes a good point there. That Hushai is kind of building this up and making it seem like this could be a grand and glorious moment for Absalom. Absalom, you get to muster the entire army of Israel, everybody from Dan to Beersheba, from north to south, and you get to be leading them into battle and this is just going to make it look so regal and so kingly. So he plays on Absalom's ego, which we know is an issue. Absalom's ego is pretty large. What else? Liz. God frustrated Ahithophel's plans, right? Ultimately, that's what happens, right? This is one of the ways in which you can see God is still in control. God is still at work. Because, I mean, it just sounds like Ahithophel's advice makes so much sense. But not only does Absalom end up taking Hushai's advice, but I mean, really, you got to go back one step from that. He asks Hushai for advice in the first place. His very highly respected advisor has already given him what sounds like a great plan. Okay, sounds great. But Absalom still is going to get a second opinion? When he has the advice of the guy whose advice was regarded as being equal to inquiring of the Lord? Wow. So ultimately, the Lord is at work here. Any other thoughts? I think Hushai does make a convincing case. You know, if you could take down Ahithophel's plan, I think Hushai does a good job of doing that. Okay, yeah, Ahithophel, that might sound good, but here's why it's bad. Remember that David and his men, they are fierce fighters. They've been doing this for a long time. These are battle-hardened, seasoned warriors. And these aren't guys that you could probably just overtake just by a surprise attack. As a matter of fact, maybe it happens that they launch a surprise attack on you because David has experience with that. So Hushai draws on real facts to build a good case for something that's going to be bad for Absalom. So kudos to Hushai, and ultimately kudos to the Lord for being in control of all this. By the end of the chapter, it appeared that Absalom could muster all Israel against his father David, yet David still had significant support from the people. How can that be seen in the chapter? Sue, what do you got?
The woman hid the two, Jonathan and the other person in the well, and made it look like it wasn't even a well.
Okay, so the two runners, Jonathan and Ahimaaz, The sons of the high priest, they're the runners. The priests are the informants. They're kind of the ones who are running back and forth. They get busted, but they get hidden, and I'm looking for it. Where was it? Oh yeah, I had gone too far. Yep, there they are. A man in Bahurim, that's what I was looking for. So there's that guy and his wife and what they do. What else? Yep, so they hide them in the well. They make it look like it's not a well. They send the guys off on a false trail so that the runners can go and bring the information to David. So that's support that David is getting. What else? Megan?
All the food and supplies that he's given at the end, like that's a lot to feed all those people. Like, he's still got to have a lot of support from his subjects to provide him with all of that.
Yeah, so David's kind of going through the countryside, and he has people kind of coming out of the woodwork offering their support to him and material support for his men. I mean, the way that verses 27 through 29 read, it's like thing on top of thing on top of thing on top of thing is being provided for David and his weary people. So, yeah, it sounds like on the surface at least that Absalom can get the army together and gather as much, thousands of troops as he can, but there's still people who support their king. You do have the little map on the front page if you want a visual representation of what's going on here. That kind of outlines the directions of where things go. With that, let's head into 2 Samuel chapter 18. David mustered the men who were with him and appointed over them commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. David sent out his troops, a third under the command of Joab, a third under Joab's brother Abishai, son of Zeruiah, and a third under Ittai the Gittite. Love that name. The king told the troops, I myself will surely march out with you. But the men said, you must not go out. If we are forced to flee, they won't care about us. Even if half of us die, they won't care. But you are worth 10,000 of us. It would be better now for you to give us support from the city. The king answered, I will do whatever seems best to you. So the king stood beside the gate, while all his men marched out in units of hundreds and of thousands. The king commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake. And all the troops heard the king giving orders concerning Absalom to each of the commanders. David's army marched out of the city to fight Israel. Boy, that sentence, or that phrase right there, just is shocking, isn't it? David fighting Israel. And the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. There Israel's troops were routed by David's men, and the casualties that day were great, 20,000 men. The battle spread out over the whole countryside, and the forest swallowed up more men that day than the sword. Now Absalom happened to meet David's men. He was riding his mule, and as the mule went under the thick branches of a large oak, Absalom's hair, and I need to make a comment on that, got caught in the tree. Back in 2 Samuel chapter 14, verse 26, it makes mention of Absalom's flowing locks and how he had just this incredibly thick, heavy head of hair. And it uses the word hair there. Here it says, literally, the Hebrew says that his head, not his hair, his head got caught in the branches. Just wanted to make that note. He was left hanging in midair while the mule he was riding kept on going. And by the way, do you notice that a guy who wants to be king is riding a mule? This is kind of the... it's not like donkeys, it's not like mules back in the day are considered these lowly beasts. If you're really powerful and rich if you have a horse. No, the royalty did ride mules. So anyway, the next time on Palm Sunday when that comes up, Yes, Jesus does ride a donkey, but that's not so much a sign of humility as Jesus riding the colt, the foal of a donkey. And that's also, by the same token, a sign of Jesus' power, because, anyway, we're not talking about Palm Sunday, I'm sorry. When one of the men saw what had happened, he told Joab, "I just saw Absalom hanging in an oak tree." Joab said to the man who had told him this, "What? You saw him? Why didn't you strike him to the ground right there? Then I would have had to give you 10 shekels of silver and a warrior's belt." But the man replied, "Even if 1,000 shekels were weighed out into my hands, I would not lay a hand on the king's son. In our hearing, the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, protect the young man Absalom for my sake. And if I had put my life in jeopardy, and nothing is hidden from the king, you would have kept your distance from me." Joab said, "I'm not going to wait like this for you." So he took 3 javelins in his hand and plunged them into Absalom's heart while Absalom was still alive in the oak tree. And 10 of Joab's armor bearers surrounded Absalom, struck him, and killed him. Then Joab sounded the trumpet, and the troops stopped pursuing Israel, for Joab halted them. They took Absalom, threw him into a big pit in the forest, and piled up a large heap of rocks over him. Meanwhile, all the Israelites fled to their homes. During his lifetime, Absalom had taken a pillar and erected it in the king's valley as a monument to himself, for he thought, "I have no son to carry on memory of my name." He named the pillar after himself, and it is called Absalom's monument to this day. Now Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, said, "Let me run and take the news to the king that the Lord has vindicated him by delivering him from the hands of his enemies." "You are not the one to take the news today," Joab told him. "You may take the news another time, but you must not do so today because the king's son is dead." Then Joab said to a Cushite, "Go, tell the king what you have seen." The Cushite bowed down before Joab and ran off. Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, again said to Joab, "Come what may, please let me run behind the Cushite." But Joab replied, "My son, why do you want to go? You don't have any news that will bring you a reward." He said, "Come what may, I want to run." So Joab said, "Run." Then Ahimaaz ran by way of the plain and outran the Cushite. While David was sitting between the inner and outer gates, the watchman went up to the roof of the gateway by the wall. As he looked out, he saw a man running alone. The watchman called out to the king and reported it. The king said, "If he is alone, he must have good news." And the runner came closer and closer. Then the watchman saw another runner, and he called down to the gatekeeper, "Look, another man running alone." The king said, "He must be bringing good news too." The watchman said, "It seems to me that the first one runs like Ahimaaz, son of Zadok." "He's a good man," the king said. "He comes with good news." Then Ahimaaz called out to the king, "All is well." He bowed down before the king with his face to the ground and said, "Praise be to the Lord your God. He has delivered up those who lifted their hands against my lord the king." The king asked, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" Ahimaaz answered, "I saw great confusion just as Joab was about to send the king's servant and me, your servant, but I don't know what it was." The king said, "Stand aside and wait here." So he stepped aside and stood there. Then the Cushite arrived and said, "My lord the king, hear the good news. The Lord has vindicated you today by delivering you from the hand of all who rose up against you." The king asked the Cushite, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" The Cushite replied, "May the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up to harm you be like that young man." The king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept. And as he went, he said, "O Absalom, O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. O Absalom, my son, my son." Joab was told, "The king is weeping and mourning for Absalom." And for the whole army, the victory that day was turned into mourning, because on that day the troops heard it said, "The king is grieving for his son." The men stole into the city, and that day the men stole into the city that day as men steal in who are ashamed when they flee from battle. The king covered his face and cried aloud, "O my son Absalom, O Absalom, my son, my son." Then Joab went into the house to the king and said, "Today you have humiliated all your men, who have just saved your life and the lives of your sons and daughters and the lives of your wives and concubines. You love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You've made it clear today that the commanders and their men mean nothing to you. I see that you would be pleased if Absalom were alive today and all of us were dead. Now go out and encourage your men. I swear by the Lord that if you don't go out, not a man will be left with you by nightfall. This will be worse for you than all the calamities that have come on you from your youth until now." And so the king got up, took his seat in the gateway, and when the men were told the king is sitting in the gateway, they all came before him. Meanwhile, the Israelites had fled to their homes. 4 questions on these verses from 2 Samuel chapter 18 and 19. I'll give you, 6 minutes. About 2 minutes yet. This is your 1 minute warning. All right. Number 5, the reasons for David staying away from the battlefront were obvious, but what reasons would David have for wanting to march with his men into battle? Obviously, we have to preserve the life of the king, right? I mean, Megan.
He's always marched into battle with his men,
Except for that one time?
yeah.
Yeah.
So Chris had to put an asterisk.
Okay.
But, and then he wanted to make sure probably that his son would live.
Okay, so I think you touched the 2 main points there. Number 1, this is what a good leader does, and yes, unfortunately, as Megan referenced, we see what happens when a king fails in his leadership duties. Because the one time that really stands out that David did not lead his people into battle was when he stayed back in Jerusalem with Bathsheba, and that's kind of the thing that set all of this mess into motion. So, in David wanting to lead his men, we see that, yes, he has again learned that lesson. And number 2, if David is the one leading his men, he's got a much better chance of seeing to it that Absalom's life is spared. Chris, did you have something else?
Well, I do think he learned from his, he didn't go back to his home, he stayed at the gates. Like, I can't get any trouble there, and he can be the first person to hear anything from the ark of Absalom.
Yes, so he puts himself in a position where, okay, if I can't be with the men, I'm going to be in the next best possible place. And I'm going to be at the city gate where when people come back, I can hear the news and potentially be able to send messages out again. Number 6, agree or disagree and explain. Joab was being a good soldier in chapter 18, verses 11 through 17, which is pretty much where we hear what Joab did with Absalom. Agree or disagree, Joab was being a good soldier. Larry?
Okay. Ertl wants to catch this. Let me bounce off all y'all. Now, Joab was being a good soldier because the objective of a soldier is to win the battle. He won the battle because Absalom's men, ran off. It was over. He won. Now, was he being a good subject of the king? No, because the king gave him a side order. Besides, win the battle, but don't kill that guy and that guy. But win the battle, so he did. He won the battle, and that's what a soldier does. At any cost, you win the battle. The job of an army is to kill people and destroy things until you win.
Sue?
I had to disagree because he did not do what the king told him to do.
Okay. So Larry has so far made the point that as a soldier, yes, he did a good job because he won the battle, and that's what soldiers are supposed to do. You go and fight and you win the battle. As a subject of the king, maybe he wasn't so good. Sue says disagree because he kind of disobeyed a direct order. Megan, what do you got?
I also disagree along with Sue's answer because when you speak to soldiers when they come back from war, their bonds with each other,
Yeah, so notice who, right. Notice it's Ahimaaz wants to go, and Joab's like, no, maybe wait bad for a little bit. Let me just send some random Cushite. He can be the bearer of bad news, so to speak. So there's that whole thing, is Joab kind of being a little bit underhanded here.
Whether you think he's being a good soldier or not, what he did was absolutely the right move politically. Because if David allows Absalom to live, what in the world happens next? When you're going to have this situation set up where you've got almost a dueling kingship, and or you give the idea that it's okay to rebel against the king and you won't have serious consequences. So, I think I agree with both sides if you disagree because they're both right. But the way this all plays out, Joab probably did the right thing.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine a situation where sparing Absalom would be the wisest move for the sake of the stability of the nation of Israel. You can understand where David is coming from, absolutely, as a father, but he's not just a father, is he? He's also the king. Chris, did you have further thoughts?
The last Bible lesson we had focused on the whole political nature of things and how politics is dirty, and you kind of have to go with, trusting God's plan in it, and God was probably using Joab at this point. Like David, time and time again, he made the wrong choice when it comes to your children. So we're just going to let this one go and end it. So that could very well be, I have no idea what God was thinking, but
Yeah. Yeah, could this be one of those situations in which God was working despite and through human failing and sin, obviously? I think you can make the case. Yeah, this isn't a cut and dried answer, is it? It certainly isn't, and that's kind of why I asked it the way I did, huh? Number 7, David's words of mourning in 18 verse 33 are echoed again, almost verbatim, in 19 verse 4. So we leave off with David at the end of 18. He's mourning, and he's still mourning at the beginning of 19. Explain how David's sorrow would be especially bitter. What do you think, Liz?
He was the one who let it get out of hand in the first place.
Okay, so might some of David's sorrow here be some guilt and some regret? Oh, if only I would have done this, that, or the other thing. I should have done this, I could have done that. Maybe that would have prevented all of this, and maybe my son would be alive and we wouldn't be in this huge mess right now. Maybe guilt has something to do with it, okay? I think that's a great point. Chris?
he's already lost one son, like early when the son was a baby, so that traumatic experience, now you're losing another son, just like this. And he probably knows it's all his fault. So.
Yeah. Man, this is heavy for David. So, his wickedness with Bathsheba and all of that ugliness, yes, it was ugly. The son he had conceived with Bathsheba as a result of that had already died. He had already faced a couple messes already in his family, and this one with Absalom was just yet another one. And so maybe this is also taking David back to, again, his guilt in the sin with Bathsheba. Oh my goodness, did I mess up? If only I wouldn't have done that. Because God had said, I'm going to bring calamity on your household from within your own household. Any other thoughts? Just the pain of losing a child. I mean, this isn't just an acquaintance of David or somebody who had been a loyal subject to him who had turned on him. I mean, his own son had turned on him, usurped his throne, tried to kill him, and now was dead. You can't imagine it. You just really can't. Sue?
Just have a question. We know
That I he's definitely old enough to have adult children. Exactly how old, I'm not sure. Off the top of your head, to put you on the spot there, Professor Cock?
I would guess he's probably pushing 60.
Yeah. I was going to guess mid 50s, but yeah. So, he said maybe 60, pushing 60.
I don't know that we have, I don't think we have reports on exactly how old David was when Absalom was born. So it's a guesstimate, so don't write it down as word of God for sure, but probably 50s, 60, something like that would seem pretty reasonable.
Thank you. I was just curious.
Yeah, no problem. Evaluate Joab's words in 19 verses 5 through 7. Megan?
Like, it makes sense, because he's saying, like, you don't go out and speak to them unless you care more for your son who wanted you dead and wanted to take a position than all the people who were willing to fight for you and stood by you. However, maybe he was trying to make himself not feel so guilty for what he did by coming up with this reasoning. I don't know, that's a maybe, but it makes sense, but it's still just kind of like, he still disobeyed.
You listen to, is that a hand? Or is that stretch? It is a hand? Wonderful, let's hear it.
I think that David needed to hear it. Like, I think somebody needed to say that to him because at the end of the day, like, kind of going back, like, I think Job did what he had to do as a soldier and, like, as somebody who was, like, in that position. Like, what if he let Absalom go and then he killed David? Like, what would the tape, like, like, what would have happened then? So I think it was one of those cases where, I mean, it's sad, but David needed to hear it. I think he needed to understand that, like, be appreciative of what happened, I guess, in a way.
So it sounds like we have agreement here that, yeah, these are hard words for David to hear, but nonetheless they're necessary for David to hear. David, you got to think about this not just as a father, but as a king, because you are not just a father, you are also a king. And right now, to your men, it seems like you are sad about the fact that they just went and won a victory for you. And they went and put an end to the threat to you, your life, and your kingdom. It seems like you wish things had gone the opposite way. And boy, that is a fantastic way to lose the loyalty of your men. So would this have been easy for David to hear? No. Was it necessary for him to hear? Yeah. Because even though he's a grieving father, he's still king of Israel. Let's look at God's word in our lives here for our last several minutes. Definitely want to cover number 1. Psalm 146, verses 3 through 5. Do not put your trust in princes and human beings who cannot save. When their spirit departs, they return to the ground. On that very day, their plans come to nothing. Blessed are those whose help is in the God of Jacob, whose hope is in the Lord their God. So 2 questions I'd like for you to take a couple minutes to ponder and talk about with the people around you, and then we can hopefully talk about them as a group. Number 1, how are those words of God reflected in the account of Absalom's rebellion and downfall? And number 2, in our politically charged society in which people seem to be staking out spots in one of 2 camps, how can Christians bear witness to these words in what they say and do? Talk about that for a couple minutes, and then we'll come together as a group. All right, if you could wind down the conversation, wrap up your thoughts, and we'll take a couple volunteers. First of all, how do you see those words in Psalm 146 reflected in the account of Absalom's rebellion and ultimate downfall? You think of any ways? Chris?
His 10-year plan to overthrow David came to nothing. It's just really sad.
Yeah. The best laid plans of Absalom here. He's been stewing and cooking over this for the longest time. He puts his plan into motion, and all of it comes to nothing. Why?
We were talking here too that God is in control, and we think that Absalom may have fallen away from God as well.
Yeah, are Absalom's actions the actions of a believer? It would be hard to imagine that they are. Okay? Ultimately, we cannot read Absalom's heart. However, the outward indications that we would have, what we can see in somebody outward's actions, these don't seem to be the actions of somebody who is a believer and is submitting to God's will in his life. It seems that just about every turn, the only person Absalom is concerned about is Absalom. Definitely want to spend a couple minutes at least on the second one. In our politically charged society, how can Christians bear witness to these words and what they say and do? Back then it was, I'm in Absalom's camp, I'm in David's camp. Today it's, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, I'm a conservative, I'm a liberal, I'm a progressive, I'm this, I'm that. And boy, oh boy, everybody, it seems, is retreating into their two sides, and near the twain shall meet. We Christians have a role to play here. What is it, Megan?
You have to remember that God is always in control. So while things may not go the way that you feel they should, God is doing what is best for his people, because that's what he's always done, and that's what he will continue to do. So I guess just to be the first line of lines, those people who are upset or who come with their various opinions and reasons, just to remind them that ultimately God is always in control, and he will continue to preserve his church and his people as he's always done.
Yeah. I think that's well said. Just remembering and reminding, first of all, oneself that, okay, if my candidate or candidates win in a given election, ultimately God is still in control. If my candidate or candidates lose a given election, ultimately God is still in control. That doesn't change, and the Lord is going to work through and despite everything to further his goodwill for his people. That's what's always going to happen. So sure, I can have my leanings, and I can have my beliefs, and I can express those at the ballot box, and all of that is well and good, but ultimately I don't want to pin my hopes on kings and princes, right? My hope is in the God of Jacob who saves. Chris?
This might be a pessimistic look at it, but in a few years, what's going to matter? I'm going to be dead, you're going to be dead.
Right.
I'm going to be in heaven. I know I'm going there, and I hope you know that you're going there too. Like, ultimately, that's the only thing that matters.
Yeah.
All the political, economic, everything, wonderful. We have our opinions. Let's try to make this place as best as we can, but in 100 years, I hope to be in heaven.
Is that a morbid way of putting it? I will let you be the judge, but ultimately, yeah. What does the Bible tell us? Our citizenship is in heaven, right? And we eagerly await a Savior from there, the Lord Jesus Christ. That's where my home is. So when things go well for me, when things don't go well for me on this side of heaven, it's ultimately all going to be okay. Larry?
Well, and not just that, but also God has plans in different sequences of events that we never would have thought of. I mean, who would have ever voted for Millard Fillmore, right? I mean, come on. But he became president, and his administration actually jump-started the abolitionist wing of the Whig Party to become the Republican Party.
That guy knows his history. He does. One parting thing I would say, and I say this as somebody who is a sinful human being and who is guilty of doing my fair share of complaining about this, that, and the other thing. What if every time I would want to complain about politics or politicians, whether that complaining is on social media or that complaining is in conversation with somebody else or that complaining is just to myself in my own mind, what if every time I want to complain, rather than complaining, I would instead pray? What if instead of complaining, I would pray? Pray for those who are in office, whether I like the fact that they are there or not. I think that's something that we Christians can do too. Right? Rather than complain, maybe I pray. And rather than getting all caught up because I'm so happy that my side won, I pray that God's will is still done, knowing that He is ultimately in control. Anyway, with that, we are technically 4 minutes past time, which means that we're not quite as late as we were the past 2 weeks, but that's okay. One more week of the life of David. Next week, we're going to take a look at kind of David's last will and testament. He's going to be passing the reins to his son Solomon. So that's what we're going to look at next time. And then the week after that, as was kind of mentioned already, we are going to be starting our study of Romans. So let's go ahead and close this morning with prayer. I thank you, my heavenly Father, through Jesus Christ, your dear Son, that you have kept me this night from all harm and danger. Keep me this day also from sin and every evil, that all my doings in life may please you. Into your hand I commend my body and soul in all things. Let your holy angel be with me, that the wicked foe may have no power over me. Amen. If you've been to church, God's blessings on the rest of your day. If you haven't been to church, go to church.